Hello and welcome everyone to the fifth webinar in our Urban Forest Spotlight series, which is part of our Solutions at Scale virtual education program. My name is Rachel and I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator at Reforest London. I currently work at the Reforest office, which is located at the Westminster Pond Centre in London, Ontario, and it is being developed as London's first Centre for Environment and Sustainability. We're excited to have you be a part of this webinar series focused on the importance of our urban forests and to highlight the work being done in expanding and growing them. A special thanks to Natural Resources Canada for 2 billion trees funding, enabling us to run this education series and our other projects here at the Westminster Pond Centre. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm situated on the traditional territory of the Ottawadron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples, nations which have longstanding relationships with the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. We extend our recognition to our neighboring First Nations communities, the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation, who continue to steward the land today. We also recognize the treaties of this area, such as the London Township Treaty of 1796, the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum, among others. I'm so excited today to welcome two speakers from Little Forests Kingston, Joanne Whitfield and Joyce Hostyn. So Little Forests Kingston brings people together to imagine a multi-species city, one where all beings can find what they need to thrive. To this end, they help local families, groups, and neighborhoods to plant little forests and pocket forests while they learn about the rich, biodiverse world they are welcoming back into their lives. Based on the Miyawaki method and Indigenous concepts of personhood, Little Forests Kingston is looking to transform Kingston into a city in a forest. So before I hand it over to you, Joyce and Joanne, I just want to let our attendees know that we will be ending with a Q&A. So feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout. Use the chat to introduce yourselves and maybe let us know where you're zooming in from. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to pop out at any time, it will be posted to our YouTube afterwards. So thanks so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you, Joyce and Joanne.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joanne Adishnikos. I'm speaking to you from Cataraqui, also known as the place of clay. I'm a retired high school teacher and one of the co-founders of Little Forests Kingston. And beside me here is Joyce.
Another of the co-founders of Little Forests Kingston, and we're speaking together from my rewilded yard, which you'll see a couple of pictures on as we go forward.
So the Oxford Junior Dictionary in 2007, they removed these words that you see here, and they replaced these outdoor and natural words with indoor and virtual words. So what do we lose when children aren't introduced to wren, acorn, willow, moss, fern, dandelion, bluebell, raven, heron, goldfinch, finch, and otter? When their stories aren't available to children, when we don't make room for their unique perspectives and knowledge. We're living in a world dominated by one story, a human-centric, individualistic, linear, mechanistic story. We're all aware of where that has led us. What if we listen to an older, more universal story than that one, where humans are just one of many, a concentric, relational, holistic story, one that Indigenous worldview provides us a model of. And all our relations model, and I'll point out that the elders in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they said it's not enough for us to reconcile with Indigenous people, we need to reconcile with the earth itself. So we're at a turning point where we need new stories to tell. And that's the work of Little Forests Kingston. We're planting little forests as songs, poems, and love letters to the land. So let's imagine it's 2030 and we've adopted the 300 protocol where every child can see at least 3 trees from their window. They can walk or wheel to school protected by a canopy of at least 30% on every street. And there's only 300 meters to a flourishing wild space. And I'm just going to ask you for a second to look at that picture of that hand. That's an 8-year-old boy's hand. They cultured all of the little microorganisms that were on that hand after he played outside. And that could either be alarming, which it is to some people, or it could be a moment where you could imagine yourself in a different story. And that story is one where you're not an individual anymore. You're not a singularity. You're a plurality. You live with all these little microorganisms who are helping you thrive.
So these are 5 questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can't count. 6 questions that Dwayne Donald from the University of Alberta suggests that we ask ourselves. And I find them very helpful as I think through and try and be part and help this new story, help spread this new story, or however you want to phrase that. So the rest of the presentation, we're going to step through each of these questions, think through each of these questions, and the work that we're doing as Little Forests Kingston as we move towards this new story. So what is the name of the forest stolen from this land? And I use the word stolen on purpose because this land was a forest. The land that in southern, southeastern, southwestern Ontario was forest, except where there were wetlands. And when colonization happened, settlers came and they cut down the forest. They completely devastated this land. And today, most people don't know the name of the forest of this land. The Great Lakes St. Lawrence region, and which is our part, but southwestern Ontario is a different forest. Robin is Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest. So if I went and asked everybody on my street, I bet you nobody would know, and even myself, I only learned that when we started Little Forests Kingston, and all of the species that are part of this forest. Robin Wall says it's a sign of respect and connection to learn the name of someone else, and yet the average American can name over 100 corporal logos and 10 plants. So learning these names is a powerful act of support for them. When we learn their names and their gifts, it opens the door for reciprocity. Now, if you want to understand Indigenous knowledge, Joanne Donald goes on to say, you have to understand the names, the relationships, the ecosystems the people come from and have lived within as a network for thousands of years. So in the land acknowledgement that was done at the beginning, there was the connection of the people to the land, and that land has been stewarded and cared for all of this time, and needs our stewardship to step in and learn from the stewardship of the First Peoples. And if you look at this hummingbird feeding their babies, I don't know if you can see exactly what's going in their mouth. If you can't, there's a whole bunch of insects in there. And look at what the nest is made out of: lichens, spider webs, all of the natural material around, and it would be in a very protected spot. Without all of this, these species don't thrive. Roman Wall again says, in order to truly love, appreciate, and belong to a place, we must learn to speak its language. And a very powerful moment for me was when Maureen Buchanan, our third co-founder, shared the story of her first time on this piece of land, which you can see all of those, all of the flags at the back and the trees that were protected. That was one of the first 3 sites we planted. And what Maureen said, and at the time she was with the Kingston Indigenous Languages Nest, a co-founder of that organization. And she said when she first came to that land, the language, the first language she heard wasn't the language of English. It wasn't Anishinaabe her language. It was the language of the spring peepers, which for her was a deep learning moment of the importance of all of the languages of the land. And I now carry that teaching in my heart because I think it's such a powerful teaching. His next question is, who am I that I am here? And I am a settler who Ukrainian ancestry, originally immigrated to the prairies, and moving out here, out east, moved into like a very large yard. And the front yard and my husband wanted a normal front yard, but you can see very typical front yard. But being rebellion, being Ukrainian with my Baba Yaga ancestors, probably that influence. And Baba Yaga was from far below before the colonization that happened in Ukraine. And I just love her as a model, even though she can be a little bit dangerous as well. So I rebelled, and instead of a normal front yard, this is the front yard, probably about 15 years into it, 15 and later on 20 years into it. And I went from thinking about this land as my land and a blank slate, which I could do anything I want with, to being that I am in relationship with, that I help steward, but it is not my land. It is, and you've probably heard the phrase land back, not sure if you have, but and it goes back to what Joanne said about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the elders saying we have to reconcile with the land. And so land back, part of land back is that reconciliation with the land. And this quote from the late Harold R. Johnson, I think is so powerful. Imagine a love so immense that a mere human is incapable of enduring it all. Imagine happiness likewise so intense that at its height, it is hard to endure. You are plugged into the neural networks, the mycelia, the root systems of the forest. You experience and can translate energy and frequencies. You are repeatedly told by the spirits of the plants and animals and insects, you are a beautiful human being. This is the reward when we reconnect with the land, when we plant little forests, when we plant pocket prairies, all of these. Who else is here alongside me?
Oh, it's still you.
Sorry about this. So we were switching to Joanne.
Hi, my name is Abby Miyawaki, a multi-species imagining workshop while making native wildflower seed bombs, and I thought it was a really wonderful exercise to encourage us to think deeply about our connections with other species and how we all need to work together as a whole and change our worldview in order to address climate change. And it was a really beautiful workshop. I'm grateful that we could collaborate with
So this
Forests
is like,
Kingston.
who else is here with along us? All of the other species. And how do we imagine each of these spaces that we may be reforesting from the land's point of view? And I like this quote by Gavin Van Horn about wildness is simply an acknowledgement that the land has a will of its own. Does the land want to be just asphalted and lawn? And in my yard, it's like, this was 10, I don't remember how many years into it. But who else is here? What surprises exist inviting in the wild, inviting in all of our relations into the yard? So parking in the driveway, turning left at that gravel path, going up to the front walk, passing the stump, which you can see all of the plants that have moved into the stump, and you probably can't see all of the insects that would be in there with the stump. Walking up to the front door, which is hidden there with all the black walnuts and other trees planted by the squirrels, thanks to the squirrels' help. My bedroom window, looking out one morning, and there was a saw-whet owl. This is not that saw-whet owl. I didn't have my camera with me. This is one from last year, which unfortunately hit a window trying to escape from some crows, but recovered and hung out in the pine trees in the front. So the next, after the land's point of view, is like the soil's point of view. Can we step back and imagine the soil from 5,000 years ago? Because that's all impacted the land when we'd be planting any of these little forests or pocket prairies. There's been a big impact. And the health, you can see the health of the soil on the right versus the health of the soil on the left. And as we plant, as we restore, as we reforest, it's the soil on the right that we are working towards. And this is just an example of a site we visited yesterday, where it's a condo, which looks like they're going to move forward. But unfortunately, that soil is contaminated. So they covered everything with a barrier so that people don't plant food on it, which means as we plant a little forest, we're going to have to cut the fabric all throughout this, or the rubber, to plant a pocket forest. So instead of looking at healing the soil, it's been, oh, how do we keep people away from the soil? So how do we reconnect? And what is the soil telling us? What can we learn from it? This is Canada Thistle at Lakeside. Each site has its own challenges, its own soil conditions, and learning from the weeds, what we might need to do with that soil to help improve it. And at Lakeside, part of the reason is it's almost entirely clay. That was the site as one of our first little forests versus the one at the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Garden on the right. We prep all of the soil the same way, but we choose plants differently depending on the site. But understanding the soil is really quite critical to your planting. And in Kingston area, we do have soil maps. In your area, you probably have soil maps that you can consult as well. And we do soil texture tests as part of it. You can see on the left, though, the health of the soil, the fertility, the carbon accrual, the nitrogen conservation, as with planting, how much they improve. And this one doesn't have a picture on trees on the left-hand side, but the next chart is just a natural regeneration at the top versus a silviculture practice versus the Miyawaki method on the bottom. And you can see the depth of the soil evolution, the amount of both the deepness and the health of soil improvement through the Miyawaki method. And then from the water's point of view, and I'm going to let Robin Wall Killer speak about the water's point of view, because again, how do we learn from Indigenous wisdom that all of these beings are alive? She says, a bay is a noun only if water is dead. When a bay is a noun, it is defined by humans, trapped between its shores and contained by the word. But the bird wikwegama, to be a bay, releases the water from bondage and lets it live. To be a bay holds the wonder that for this moment, the living water has decided to shelter itself between these shores, conversing with cedar roots and a flock of baby mergansers. Because it could do otherwise, become a stream or an ocean or a waterfall. And Indigenous STEAM, I'd suggest looking up Indigenous STEAM because they have a wonderful set of activities to help you build relationships with the land, with the water, and with your plants, with the plants and with the animals.
So what gives and sustains life here? I'm just going to quote from Richard Wagamese, the great Ojibwe author who we lost a few years ago. I recommend reading anything by him. So go ahead. I've been considering the phrase all my relations for some time now. It's hugely important. It's our saving grace in the end. It points to the truth that we're all related. As Maureen said, the trees are medicine for the children and the children are medicine for the trees. We're all connected. We all belong to each other. The most important word is all. Not just those who look like me, sing like me, dance like me, speak like me, pray like me, or behave like me. All my relations. It means every person, just as it means every blade of grass, rock, mineral, and creature. We live because everything else does. If we were to collectively change to live that teaching, the energy of that change of consciousness would heal us all and heal the planet. We do it one person, one heart at a time. We are connected. We are the answer. Well, here we are. We're in a school in Perth teaching some kids about all our relations and trees and roots and so on.
So how can I participate in the life that is here? Here we'll get into a little bit more about the Miyawaki method and the way we use it. So this is in Bordeaux in France, and you can look at a parking lot with 9 cars in it. Just think our cities are full of parking lots. What that could become. About the front approach to this temple, and you can see how narrow on each side of this approach to the temple is. And I think about all of our active transport routes, all of our sidewalks, just all of our roads and what could be possible. This is 14 years later. Can you imagine? The in front of a university or really any business building. An apartment building. Too many of our apartment buildings look like this. What's possible? A parking lot in the back of a really unused asphalt lot in the back of a building. In this case, maybe a pocket forest with meadow plantings. A bank. a strip mall, a house's front yard, and in this case, potentially a food forest. That's something that we're working on as well as planting food forests. And this is one of our little forests. This is Kelsey, an amazing, amazing person who at Addictions and Mental Health, she managed to get permission to do a pretty large little forest there. And this is the planting. And the building is on the right. You can't see their building. And they also installed a planting of food forest and a vegetable garden. And there is a strong tie between mental health and connection with plants, with the hands in the soil. So Kelsey's work, I think, has really informed us and helped us learn about that important connection. This is the senior center and the prep for the senior center, and a big expanse of grass that the only way it was used was to cut across and walking. And that's been an incredible planting. You can see we planted, I think it was 1,800 trees and shrubs, 3 different themed little forests there. One was the walking forest for climate migration. One was the Great Lakes forest, and the one at the hedgerow at the back was the bird forest, where we didn't quite follow the proportions of the Miyawaki method because there was also already some existing trees, but because it backed into people's yards, so we had more understory and shrub layer in that. But this has been incredible because so many people attend the senior center for workshops that this has got everybody's curiosity up, and it spread far and wide, and it was our first little forest on city land. What might they look like in 50 years? We don't know in Canada because we don't have 50-year-old Miyawaki forests, but this is one in Japan. So I think this is what we potentially might be seeing. They won't grow as fast initially as they do in Japan, but I think after 50 years, they might be as large as this. So our method of growing a city in a forest is inspired by Dr. Akira Miyawaki, and you can see from seeing the project the process that they typically use. But there is something super important that Joanne will be talking about in a minute, missing from this diagram. And that is the engagement that we start with right at the beginning and carries through all the way through in terms of understanding to planting to stewardship. And I'll let her speak about that in a minute. But trees, like people, prefer to live in community. So that's what a Miyawaki forest is all about, is planting trees in community. And 4 layers, canopy tree, understory shrub. And you can see in this diagram from Allied Microforest where they've got the underground diversity as well showing. So I love this diagram. Something else that is now influencing us is this tree selection guide for the 21st century. And they look at how climate is going to be impacting forests, urban forests. And they have been using a method that they call planting pocket woodlands. And the pocket woodlands are almost identical to the Miyawaki method, but not totally. And you can see this is a 5-year planting, same diversity of species, the same multi-layers, and the same density of planting. The only difference is that after 15 years, they thin out that they have 1 pioneer species, not willow, not poplar, because those are just too fast growing, but a slower early successional species to help the others kind of go up. And then after 15 years, and then after 25 years, because they're planting in public parks and because they are big on aesthetics, they thin out a few more species because they decide, oh, we want an oak canopy, so they might thin out some of the species that are slowing down those oaks. So almost identical and very interesting. We have a forest builder spreadsheet, which we're always happy to share. And this forest builder spreadsheet, it has all of the species that we work with. It has the 4 layers. It has the percentages all automatically calculated out, because with the Miyawaki method, there's a certain percent of canopy, a certain percent of understory, a certain percent of tree layer, and a certain percent of shrub layer. And also, knowing which forest you're in, not too many conifers. We're not a heavy conifer forest, so we don't ecosystem, so we don't plant too many conifers. So this spreadsheet helps us with all of this. And then in terms of how might climate change bring about new sets of relations, that's a question that we have to keep asking. As Little Forests Kingston, one of the things we are doing is helping Carolinian species migrate. We're already in the land in between in that we have Great Lakes St. Lawrence species and we have some of the Carolinian species, but we're helping some of the other Carolinian species migrate because there's no way they can either move fast enough or get past Toronto and the 401. And part of like thinking about how it might affect those food, water, and bird relatives is, let's say the pawpaw here. There's a zebra swallowtail butterfly that is the only host plant for the pawpaw. And so by bringing the pawpaw here, as the zebra swallowtail itself is migrating, we will have pawpaws ready for as a host plant. And analyzing your clay, our soil prep is really just as you can see, leaf straw, old hay at the base, compost or aged manure, and arborist wood chips. Although, as Astrid, our soil expert, says, it's like lasagna. Any way you layer it out is good, but really lots of organic matter, and we let the soil organisms do the work rather than digging. And then 30 plus species of little native plants and trees. Ideally, we are sourcing plugs. Our main supplier is verbindens, but for other species, we do look at different suppliers. And on the right-hand side, Joanne this year will be doing a workshop and cultivating Indigenous microorganisms, because right now we're purchasing mycorrhizal fungi to help the soil, the roots establish, and we're putting in a handful of soil from forests. But we don't want to continue doing that. We'd ideally like to cultivate locally those microorganisms and that mycorrhizal fungi. Cooperative processes, they now know. Like the old horticulture, we spaced trees far apart. We didn't have the diversity. We didn't have the layers. Western science hasn't caught up as to why these cooperative processes win out versus competitive, but they do. And the Miyawaki method, whether he knew it or not when he was doing it, I don't know, maybe he knew it out. He must have. He did. He looked at those cooperative processes and say, let's do it that way. But as you can see from Leroy and Little Bear's quote, Indigenous peoples have always known this. And you can arrange them any way you like. These are just some examples from Ivy and Tiny Forest Handbook. The minimum width, the most important thing to keep in mind, is no narrower than 4 meters, with a total of 100 square meters. And I love this park in New Zealand where they have all of these Miyawaki forests integrated into the entire landscape plan. And the LA forest microforest method, here you can see on the left, they place their canopy trees first, and then they add in their tree layer and then the shrub layer. But you can do it really any way you want. Dr. Akira Miyawaki, he often would just let the kids do it however they want it, completely randomly, because he said that's the way it happens in the natural world. Usually little forests, we do suggest people, we have the trees, the shrubs, etc., grouped into different groupings, and just say, go grab one from each of 3 different groups and plant them in the same square meter.
How can we live well together here? So we want to help people come to be mythic walking, which is a word from Anishinaabemowin. Maybe you're familiar with the fact that in Anishinaabemowin, 70% of the words are verbs, as opposed to English, where 70% of the words are nouns. And that word means being in the forest, being among the trees. So they don't really have a word for forest, they have a word for being among the trees. So how do we help people want to be there? We have to think about tree equity, because we don't all live in wealthy neighborhoods which can afford to plant lots of trees. Lots of people live where there are very few trees to experience themselves. So we have to think about that. And what we've done here in Kingston is try to target those neighborhoods, but also started a relationship with Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation, who provides geared to income housing. This is a woman who was part of our engagement process at the senior center. And what we did there was we put everybody in a group, and then we gave them some other beings to consider when they designed their little forest. So her group got teenager, an Indigenous language learner, and an American toad to consider in her designs. We just listened to her describe what they designed.
We had to think about a teenager, an American toad, and language learners. So we were thinking like be good for our language learners. We're also going with like butternut, tulip, Kentucky coffee, and hackberry as our canopy, bringing in beauty box for our toad, nuts, food, stuff like that. Our understory focusing again on foods, medicine, mulberry plum, elderberry, sassafras. And then we have hazelnut, spice bush, persimmons, and Jersey tea, all beneficial for bones, for food, understory, leaf litter, all that for our toad. We want a few water features. We have paths coming. This is north. This is our senior center, meadows on both sides. An orchard down here on our south. Couple water features, sitting area. Want to invite everyone to come into the center, hear the sounds of nature, enjoy our understory, also food and medicine.
So this is the first KFHC, the Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation geared to income site we're going to be planting on. And it's not, you can see some of the houses have cars. That's a condominium right next door to it. A place that doesn't have any cars, sort of single driveways, that's the Housing Corporation site. And there are literally hundreds of people who live in that area, in those buildings. And so we approached, we got these, the people who are interested together to work through that design process, just like you saw at the senior center. And we'll see it in the next slide. There they are, figuring this out. I just want to tell you about this gentleman in the bottom right here. According to the organizers through KFHC, this man really doesn't come out of his apartment. He didn't interact with any of the other residents, and they were a little bit worried about him. And when he read the sign for a little forest and that he could come in and participate, he showed up. Turns out he has planted thousands of trees in his life. He used to work years ago in the 70s for the Ministry of Natural Resources. And when he heard about trees and trees coming to this spot, it was like a little miracle for him. It was lovely to have him there. So this is the site. This is the preparation. And well, it doesn't look like residents, does it? It isn't. It's kids. So it happens that this particular site is beside 3 schools. And we got those kids involved. Because look at that, they're awesome. And you can see the prep going on, different, so there's 3 different little forests going in, or sorry, 2 with a pollinator patch. And all of these kids who are outside digging and helping the residents, some of the people from the group are there as well, helping do this. And speaking of schools, so we definitely are working with schools, and we're just piloting a project in the fall call. We're going to be doing a dispersed nursery model because we need a lot of trees for this. And one of our members has figured out how to grow trees. This is a lot of trees in buckets. And so we're going to work with 10 schools to get them starting trees for us. And they're also going to be working on starting pollinator plants too. So, or not just necessarily native wildflowers. And you can see that in the corner, there's some kids doing that as well. So we have this plan for dispersed nursery that we think will really engage teachers and kids. And those are black cherry trees that kids started this year.
And then the other groups that we are doing a lot of engagement with, City of Kingston and other people who have ownership or control of land, because the toughest thing is access to land. Tree equity is really a land issue in terms of Joanne talked about landlords, for example. And with City of Kingston, actually, when we planted our first year in 2021, planting 3 sites, we decided we weren't going to go for any public land because we knew it would take a while to build a relationship with the city and to get through all of the hurdles of planting in public places. But now, 3 years later, it's amazing. We've got a partnership, an official partnership with the City of Kingston. This is the report that just went through council on April 9th with a Little Forest pilot program. which will have a second little forest on public land. Plus, they're supporting our work around planting a goal of 50 pocket forests this year. And actually, those are 3 little foresters there speaking at committee. So we speak at a number of council. If there's something related in front of council, we do delegations to speak about it. And this was a motion for signing the Montreal Biodiversity Pledge. So here's our Pocket Forest Kit brochure. So this year, for the first time, we're really putting an effort to do pocket forests. And this is for a combination of reasons. One, a little forest here and there is not going to bring the level of biodiversity back to the land that the land really needs. And it's not going to reach the bulk of the population, but getting to individuals' yards and pocket forests and individual yards, one by one, each of those people, as they convert, we're going to put up little signs. I think the city will fund little signs. And then just get them to fall in love with all of these, small but mighty, little forest for the birds, pocket forest for butterflies. We have different themes for each of the pocket forests. And we did our first few last year just as a prototype or to learn about it. And you think the one on the left, it looks great. We'll plant in all that grassy area when we showed up. Well, it turns out that's a European buckthorn and multiflora hedgerow. So the homeowner has started the whole process of taking the entire thing out, but we did an initial 45 trees and shrubs there last year. Here's another one that's a hedgerow that was planted in the fall. And just think, any space like this was a yard from the spring, a pocket forest, the possibilities. Here's another one that's being planted. And this one will be both for cooling. They have no shade in their house, but also to absorb all of that water that's coming down. This is the first one that we planted in Reno Heights, which is a real tree inequity, a neighborhood that's really suffering tree inequity. And so it was really exciting. This was just planted this week. It's a pocket forest. But our hope is that the couple that planted this one, they're very close to another Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation site. So they may become champions to help move that little forest project forward. And then with the city partnership, this is a city park, and there's a few naturalized parks, but with the partnership, there also, we can plant both pollinator patches, but also pocket forests on some of these more public lands without going through the whole little forest process. So, in this Lawrence Park, right near an important creek. And what I love about the pocket forest, this is a neighborhood in Balsam Grove, and there's 6 homeowners. This woman here with a little kid, she recruited 6 neighbors to walk around, and we checked out each of their yards and the possibilities and what we might do with pocket forests in each of those yards. So the possibilities of the mycelial spread of pocket forests, I think, is quite exciting. So each year, and we think about pocket forests as gifts to the earth. We're using the gift economy model. So it's up to people how they return the gift. But as we do this, you can see that interconnections building across and throughout the city as we grow that city in a forest. And I took the idea for this sketch from Landscape Interactions in the States, where the traveling distance of a little bee is only 150 meters, and then the bumblebee can travel further. But as each of these plants, that means that there becomes this continuous mosaic of habitats that the bees and the birds and all the creatures can use to link, to move between. And so that the city becomes not just for humans, but embraces all of the different beings. And 15 years later, this is what one yard may transform into if the forest was the focus. Would be completely different if it was a meadow. And we also think about things as mother patches. And this paper was talking about cities as great places to experiment with, cities as hot stepping stones, like for species migration, and that they're already warmer. But we prefer to think about them as mother patches. And just like in my yard, how the squirrels were so instrumental in planting so many of the trees that now have grown up in my yard, as we plant these species, these pockets throughout the city, these little forests and pocket meadows, then the birds, the jays, the bats, the squirrels can help spread them. And so can all the people as we do the winter sowing method and collect the seeds from these different mother patches and place them elsewhere. Amitabh Ghosh says, what we need now is a vitalist mass movement, a collective work of beauty and art and human spirit and imagination, which may actually be magical enough to change hearts and minds around the world. And this is the kids planting at the senior center. And I think the planting little forests, planting pocket forests, whatever you call them, is part of this vitalist mass movement.
So I said at the beginning that I'm a retired high school teacher. These are 3 students who were part of my my little club that I had at the school that I worked at. And I just want to point out they're lovely, lovely human beings. And they were very grateful for the opportunity to kind of reframe the way they thought about the world and start to understand it through an Indigenous perspective. And the one on the right there with his, he has a mask on, his name is Robert. He is studying civil engineering at McGill University now, but he started a little Forest McGill club there, and they're trying pretty hard to plant on the McGill campus. They haven't had any success yet, but they're learning all the time about forests, about trees, about the Miyawaki method, about Indigenous worldview. And he is actually the chair of our board. And I think that's all we've got for you. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much to both of you. I think that was a really powerful presentation. I loved the quotes that you included, and the photos are amazing. I'll open it up to our audience. If you have any questions, please put those in the chat for Joyce and Joanne to answer. And yeah, great work that you're doing in Kingston, and really powerful to be able to see, you know, your process behind it, and to hear you speak about the importance of the work. Yeah, especially as we go forward, and it's not just about getting trees in the ground, it's about restoring a relationship, creating a relationship. So I really appreciate that. Yeah.
I would say so many people think all we're doing is planting trees, and we're like, no, this is like this subversive little,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's really how you do. That's how it's going to change. Planting the trees in the ground. If you plant a tree in the ground, but you don't tell somebody, don't teach anybody about that tree or help them learn about that tree and come into a relationship with it, they're not going to care about it. So they have to care about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we hear a lot from teachers when we do our schoolyard plantings, is that their students will go out afterwards and, you know, they're swinging off the tree and breaking off branches and stuff like that is something that's pretty common with, you know, they're doing the work to get the trees in the ground, and we're helping to make that process happen. It's just a matter of being able to share the larger message, right? And not just add another, you know, something to like a playground sort of thing. But it's difficult for us to see. But
I think that the dispersed nursery with using schools is the place to do it. When a kid gets to put that seed in the ground and see that little tree, they're going to love it more. Yeah.
And then the first year, one of the 3 sites was Wolf Island. And Astrid, who was the lead on that site, she had this, you know, basically she calculated out how much they would plant when the kids were there, because it was right beside a school. Turns out the kids planted 1 tree each, because after they planted that 1 tree each, they had to take pictures with it. They had to give the tree a name. So they just instead built a relationship with the 1 tree, which I actually think was a fabulous outcome from that.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. We do have a question in the chat. What do you think is the largest barrier to creating more of these pocket forests?
I don't think this year we're going to have any barriers to planting pocket forests. It'll be more, can we manage the number of people interested at this point? Because there's something about them that has got people quite excited and inspired, which is really fabulous. The little forests, on the other hand, the biggest barrier is access to the land, gatekeepers, schools. We have not yet been successful. There's a whole, So for the city, it took 3 years of working with the city and establishing that relationship and kind of demonstrating that we can follow through and what the outcomes would be. The school boards, though, that's a whole different process, a whole different institution, and it will be the same with landlords, although we have KFHC now. So for the larger little forests, it's that access to the land, and if it's controlled by a bureaucracy, it's building that relationship and working through the whole, amount of time it takes to get that first one in.
Did you say you have 50 pocket forests for this year to plant?
That we do, and so far I've done, and this is spring, we were going to do the bulk in the fall, but I think we have 15 or 20 going in spring, and we haven't contacted everybody that's reached out yet. And the city has offered to advertise it. We say no, please don't, because I don't think we can handle it if you put it out there on your communications channel. And, so the one, I did 3 in my neighborhood that we met at CD Saturday, because we had a booth at CD Saturday, and we haven't done any other booths yet this year. And this one woman, she recruited 2 neighbors, and so we planted 3 within sightlines of each other. And they're actually going to convert their entire front yards to a mix of forest and kind of a ditch scape, then rewild a ditch. And
we got that many 50 with almost no effort.
Yeah.
Wow,
So I think
that's great.
maybe 3 or 4 years from now. But just yesterday, I was talking with Josh, another one of our super dedicated volunteers, and he thinks 10 years from now, Kingston will be an actual city in a forest, and we can disband as an organization. We will no longer need it because everyone will have yes, this is just the way our city should be. So that's our hope and dream, is to not exist in 15 or 10 years or less.
That's great. Yeah. I was going to ask what your what the size is for your pocket forest. You said someone's doing a whole ditch, but is there a general size? How many plants are you putting into these pocket forests?
We have they tend to be right now they're from 12 to 45 trees and shrubs. We're doing not the same number, not the same kind of percent of each layer as we would do in a full Miyawaki forest. We're doing more understory shrub than we would in the conventional Miyawaki forest. And there is one yard that we're going to do in the fall just because it's big. Probably will be an entire little forest going in there. So it really varies. Pocket forests, we say they range from, then the city, kind of in that city report, it was between 12 and 45. But you can combine multiple pocket forests, which means you can have as many as you really want to plant.
That's great. Yeah, it's I think it's, I mean, we had someone from David Suzuki Foundation working on the Butterfly Way project, who did ran a webinar with us in February, and she was talking about, the importance of having these spaces for wildlife to move through, just as you did with with the bees you mentioned. But yeah, it's definitely an inspiring future to imagine, and I hope that you can disband in 15 years or so.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I think we can maybe close out early. But we really appreciate you being here today to talk about Little Forests Kingston and to share the really impactful work that you're doing over in Kingston.
Super. Thank you, Rachel, for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. And
all
good
right,
luck in your forestation of London.
Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely we'll have to chat more about between the two of us about what sorts of things we can share. I think that, this knowledge mobilization, being able to bounce ideas off of organizations that are working towards the same goal is really important, and we can look to what you're doing, and you can, we can benefit from each other in the work that we're doing to reforest. So yeah, we'll definitely be in contact.
Great. Yeah, because we're movement building is what we're doing, aren't we? Yeah, all of us together, movement building.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again for being here. For our attendees, thanks for attending today. Again, we extend our thanks to Natural Resources Canada for the funding enabling this education series. This webinar will be posted to our YouTube, so keep an eye out for that. And if you enjoyed this webinar series, you can go to our YouTube and see some of the additional webinars that are being posted there. So thanks so much. I'll say bye now, and yeah, take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, bye.